The black man had only $3 for a blind date. The single mother and CEO at the next table watched every moment. His name was Marcus, 34 years old, hardworking, honest. But tonight, he wasn't a construction worker covered in dust. He was just a man hoping someone might see the good in him. He'd borrowed his cousin's only clean shirt, ironed it twice. He walked into the restaurant stomach tight, palms damp, rehearsing how to stretch $5 like it was 50. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this place with chandeliers and silver forks, but he'd said yes when a friend set him up on a blind date with potential. And across the room sat Clara, his date, scrolling her phone, her face fixed in disappointment before he even reached the table. At another table, Vanessa, a single mother and CEO, noticed the tension. She'd seen that look before, not just pity, but judgment. What she didn't know was that this night would expose the cruelty people hide behind smiles and change how she saw the world forever. Marcus sat down, nervous but polite, his heart pounding like a drum trapped in his chest. He could feel the sweat gathering at the back of his neck, the rough fabric of his borrowed shirt sticking to his skin. Across the table, Clara didn't even look up right away. Her manicured fingers kept scrolling through her phone, the faint blue light flickering against her expressionless face. When she finally looked up, she didn't smile. "You're late," she said flatly, without warmth, without curiosity. He blinked at his watch. 7, oh, 2 minutes? He'd run from the bus stop, nearly slipped on the curb, and still arrived 2 minutes late. "Sorry," he said, his voice careful, gentle. Traffic was bad. She gave a short, dismissive nod, her lips pursing slightly, as if that small delay had already told her everything she needed to know about him. He tried again, reaching for conversation. "It's a nice place," he said, glancing at the flickering candles and soft jazz in the background. The restaurant gleamed with wealth, glass panels, white napkins folded like art. He felt out of place but held his posture. He had promised himself not to shrink tonight. Clara looked around, unimpressed. "Yeah, I come here sometimes after work," she said. "It's quiet." Her tone was practiced, the kind of casual confidence that only comes from people used to being served. She looked at him then, truly looked, her eyes scanning his shoes, his worn jacket, the calusas on his hands. "So, what do you do?" she asked. "I'm a construction foreman," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "Just got certified last month." He was proud of that. He'd worked hard for that title. Nights spent studying after 10-hour shifts, saving for classes instead of dinners out. But her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in admiration, but in polite surprise. "So you build houses," she said, her tone lighter now, almost patronizing. "Yeah," he said, still smiling. "Homes for people. I like that part of it, seeing a family move in. Knowing you helped make that happen." She nodded once, her eyes already drifting away again. She reached for her wine glass, though the waiter hadn't yet arrived. The silence that followed was sharp. Marcus tried to fill it. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you do?" "I'm in marketing," she said quickly, as if the question was beneath her. "Fashion retail mostly. Busy season right now." She looked at him then, as if expecting him not to understand, not to belong in her world of campaigns and meetings. Marcus nodded. "That's great," he said softly. "My sister's into fashion too." But the moment had already passed. The music swelled gently around them, but at their table it felt like static. The waiter arrived with meanness, and Marcus could feel the tension thickening. The way Clara barely looked at him, the way her smile never reached her eyes, it reminded him of every interview, every meeting, every room where he'd had to prove he was enough. 2 tables away, Vanessa noticed everything. She saw Clara's body language, the tiny size, the subtle grimace each time Marcus spoke. She'd seen that before, in boardrooms, in restaurants, even in her own reflection years ago. Marcus didn't know it, but his every word, every breath, was being silently judged by 2 worlds, the woman in front of him and the one quietly watching behind her wine glass. The waiter cleared his throat softly, setting menace before them. Marcus reached for his, grateful for the distraction, but his hands trembled slightly. He tried to hide it beneath the table, smiling as if nothing was wrong. Clara didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to care. When the waiter approached, pen in hand and politeness in his voice, Clara didn't even glance at Marcus before ordering. "I'll have the salmon, asparagus, and the house wine," she said with a confidence that belonged to people who never checked prices. Marcus froze. He looked down at the menu, the numbers swimming before his eyes. The cheapest meal cost nearly $24, and his wallet held only $5. He forced a small smile, nodding like everything was fine, like he hadn't already done the math in his head 5 different ways. He ran his finger down the menu slowly, pretending to decide even though he already knew. He cleared his throat softly. "Just a coffee for me, please." The waiter paused, a flicker of understanding crossing his face before he nodded. "Of course, sir." Clara looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to subtle judgment. "You're not eating?" she asked, tilting her head. Her voice was light, but there was something sharp beneath it. "I already had dinner," Marcus lied, keeping his tone easy. "Just wanted to enjoy your company." She blinked once, then smiled. But it was the kind of smile people wear when they're being polite to strangers. The waiter walked away, and Marcus felt the weight of the silence between them. He wrapped his hands around the empty coffee cup as if it could ground him. Clara looked around the room, her attention drifting anywhere but him. Across the restaurant, Vanessa noticed again. She saw Clara's body stiffen, the way she pulled her phone closer, checking notifications as Marcus tried to make small talk. He mentioned his crew at work. A funny story about a coworker's kid, but she only laughed once. A short, empty sound that ended before it began. When the waiter returned with the coffee and her wine, Marcus thanked him sincerely. The waiter, a young Latino man, gave him a nod that said he understood, a quiet exchange between two men who knew what it felt like to be invisible. Clara, however, didn't even glance up. She was too busy taking a picture of her food for Instagram, adjusting her glass to get the right lighting. As she posted, Marcus sipped his coffee slowly, his eyes lowered. He could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He hated that he cared, hated that he had to care. He wanted to be seen for his kindness, his integrity, his persistence, not for the size of his wallet. But in this room filled with laughter and luxury, it was impossible to escape the hierarchy of worth. Minutes passed before Clara set her phone down. "So," she said, "you're into construction. Must be tiring." The pause before that last word hung in the air, waited with quiet condescension. Marcus nodded, forcing a polite laugh. "Yeah, it's tough work. But I like building things. It's honest." She smiled faintly, but her eyes said something else, a judgment already written, a conclusion already made. The silence stretched longer, more suffocating now. He stirred his coffee, though it didn't need stirring, each slow circle of the spoon echoing in his ears like a clock ticking down the moments until the night ended. ChatGPT said Vanessa sat at her table, pretending to scroll through her phone, but her mind wasn't on the emails lighting up her screen. Her attention kept drifting back to Marcus, to the way his shoulders curved slightly inward, as if trying to take up less space in a world that already gave him too little. She'd recognized that posture. She'd worn it once herself, years ago when she was young and poor and invisible. Her memory carried her back to a diner on the south side of the city. She had been a waitress then, working double shifts, wiping down tables with raw hands. She remembered the businessmen who ignored her greetings, who never met her eyes, who complained about tips before she even brought the bill. She remembered one man, in particular, the one who told her she should smile more if she wanted to be noticed. Back then, she had swallowed the bitterness, smiled anyway, and gone home with just enough to buy groceries for her son. That memory burned quietly now as she watched Clara lean back in her chair, bored, detached, unaware of the cruelty in her indifference. Marcus spoke with quiet dignity, trying to fill the silence between them. His words were careful, his tone steady, but the cracks were showing. A man fighting to keep his pride standing when everything around him whispered that he didn't belong. When Clara stood to take a call, Vanessa's gaze followed her. The woman's heels clicked briskly against the marble floor. Her voice light and carefree once she stepped outside. Marcus sat alone, staring into his coffee cup as if it could give him strength. The waiter came by, setting down the check discreetly. Marcus reached into his wallet, pulling out a worn, folded bill, a $5 note that looked older than the both of them. He smoothed it carefully on the table, his fingers trembling just slightly. Vanessa's throat tightened. It wasn't pity she felt. It was recognition. She saw herself in him, in that silent act of pride, the way he straightened the bill, the way he whispered something to the waiter, likely apologizing for what little he could give. She'd been there, too, more than once, trying to hold dignity in the face of humiliation, praying no one would notice how close she was to breaking. The waiter nodded with quiet respect, sliding the check away as if it were nothing. Marcus thanked him softly. There was something about that moment, the exchange between two men from worlds that never seemed to get a fair chance, that pierced Vanessa more than any speech or story ever could. She glanced around the restaurant. People laughed over wine, clinked glasses, posed for pictures. No one noticed the man with the $5 bill or the story behind his silence. But Vanessa saw it. She saw every unspoken word written in the slump of his shoulders, every dream buried beneath exhaustion, every ounce of grace that came from simply refusing to be ashamed. Marcus stood up slowly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. He kept his head low, trying to slip out without drawing attention. But Vanessa couldn't let him go. Not yet. Something in her chest pulled her forward, something that wouldn't allow her to stay seated and pretend she hadn't seen. "Excuse me," she called gently. He turned startled, his eyes uncertain, ready to apologize though he'd done nothing wrong. She held up a folded napkin. "You forgot something," she said. He frowned, confused. He hadn't left anything behind. Still, he stepped closer. The restaurant grew quieter for a moment, the soft hum of conversation fading into the distance. She gestured toward the empty chair across from her. "Would you sit for a second?" He hesitated. He could feel the eyes on him. Not many, but enough to make him want to shrink back into the background. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially not from someone who looked like Vanessa, elegant, confident, and clearly successful. But her expression was warm, sincere. So, after a pause, he nodded and sat. "I saw what happened," she said softly, her tone neither pitying nor invasive. "You handled yourself with more grace than most people I know." He looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of his cup. "It's just not my kind of place," he murmured. "Didn't realize how fancy it was until I walked in." She smiled faintly. "That's not what I meant," she said. "I meant you kept your dignity, even when someone tried to take it from you." He exhaled slowly, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being seen like that, not for his struggle, but for the quiet strength inside it. "It's been a rough month," he admitted after a pause. "Lost some hours at work. Rent's late, but I thought maybe a night out would help. Guess I thought wrong." Vanessa leaned forward, elbows on the table, her voice low. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "Sometimes people mistake money for worth. They don't realize that character doesn't come with a price tag." He looked up at her, eyes filled with surprise and a hint of gratitude. She reached into her purse, not for cash, not for charity, but for a small white card. She placed it gently on the table between them. "I run a mentorship program," she said. "We help people find leadership positions in trade industries. We could use someone like you, someone who leads with heart." He blinked, not sure if he'd heard her right. "You don't even know me," he said quietly. "I know enough," she replied. "You showed more integrity in one evening than some executive show in a lifetime." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the world moved on. Waiters clearing tables, glasses clinking, laughter spilling from nearby booths. But in that small corner of the restaurant, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a bridge between two lives built from struggle and resilience. After Marcus left, the restaurant seemed to shift back to its usual rhythm, conversations rising, silverware clinking, loud echoing faintly off the walls. But for Clara, something felt heavier than before. She walked back toward her table to grab her phone charger, not expecting to see Vanessa still sitting there, calmly sipping her wine, her posture composed but her eyes distant, thoughtful. Clara hesitated, clutching her purse against her side. "That guy," she began awkwardly, her voice trying to sound casual. "Seemed, nice." Vanessa looked up, her gaze steady. There was no smile, no pleasantry, just quiet conviction. "He was more than nice," she said. "He was decent." Clara shifted, feeling suddenly smaller beneath the weight of that word. Decent. It was simple, but it carried judgment, the kind that didn't need to be loud to sting. She forced a soft laugh, the kind people use when they're uncomfortable. "I just didn't think." "That's the problem," Vanessa interrupted gently but firmly. "You didn't think. You judged." Clara froze, her breath catching slightly. Vanessa didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Every word landed like truth cutting through silence. "Do you know how many men like him build the world around you?" Vanessa continued. "The offices we work in, the roads we drive on, the homes we live in. They do the hard work that makes our comfort possible. Yet we treat them like they're invisible." Clara looked down, suddenly aware of how shallow her complaints sounded. The cold coffee, the long work week, the text she'd sent mocking a man who'd only ever tried to show up with honesty. Vanessa set her glass down gently. "When I was your age, I did the same thing," she said quietly. "I thought success meant only sitting at the best tables with the best people. I looked down on anyone who reminded me of where I came from, until life reminded me what real worth looks like." Clara looked up, curiosity flickering through her shame. "What changed?" she asked softly. "I lost everything once," Vanessa said. "A business deal collapsed. My husband passed away. Suddenly, I was a single mother with a child and a stack of bills. The people who had smiled at me in boardrooms disappeared. But the ones who stayed, they weren't the rich or the powerful. They were the ones who knew struggle, the ones who didn't need to prove their value. The restaurant noise seemed to fade as Vanessa's words settled. Clara nodded slowly, her throat tight. I didn't mean to make him feel small, she whispered. But you did, Vanessa said, not unkindly. And one day, you'll remember this, when someone looks at you the same way you looked at him. That's when you'll understand what dignity costs. Clara didn't respond. Her reflection in the restaurant's mirror looked different now, not flawless, not composed, but raw. Vanessa finished her wine, stood, and placed a generous tip on the table. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked out, leaving Clara alone with her untouched meal in a silence that pressed harder than any words ever could. That night, Marcus walked home with his hands deep in his pockets, but his head held high. He didn't get the girl, but he got something better, his dignity back. He unfolded the napkin Vanessa had given him. On the back of her business card, she'd written a single sentence, "Keep showing up. The world will catch up." He smiled, not because life had suddenly become easy, but because someone had finally seen him beyond his $5, beyond his skin, beyond the quiet walls of judgment that society builds. Across town, Clara sat alone, scrolling through social media, but the image of Marcus wouldn't leave her mind. For the first time, she questioned herself, her values, the stories she'd been taught about success and worth. And Vanessa. She sent an email the next morning, a new initiative for her company, Human Dignity First, because sometimes it only takes one night, one act of kindness, to remind the world that empathy, not status, is what truly makes us human.